I think people are attracted to real estate naturally for a couple of reasons. One of those is, like sort of the negative people paint of real estate is that it's more active and that you have to be more involved. Well, like the flip side of that coin is because it is more active up front, it is a little bit more of a business, you actually have more control over your outcomes. And so like if you have an index fund, which is awesome, you're diversified, you own the entire market, like you're just going ultimate diversification. Well, real estate is sort of the opposite. It's saying, you know what, I'm going to go concentrate on one little neighborhood that I have an intuitive feel. And that's the cool thing about real estate is that we sort of know what a good rental property is because we've lived in other homes. We understand what neighborhoods people are looking for. And so you can go, unlike stocks where you have to pick like, what's the best tech stock? Like who really knows what's the fundamentals of a tech stock? But you can go look at a piece of property and pretty quickly understand why it's good and what's good about the neighborhood and whether that's up and coming. The numbers are really simple. Like if you're a medical professional, you've done a lot more complicated math and science than the real estate math. So it's simple, it's understandable, which is something that Warren Buffett always encourages people to do. Like invest in something you understand and that you know. And that's really what real estate is. It's a controllable thing. You can get involved. You can affect your outcome. If you're trying to retire early, which is I'm a big or reach financial independence is more probably the right word, you can kind of control the timing of that a little bit better through real estate. And so for all of those reasons, that tangible quality of it is a real asset. I find people just attract naturally to that.
Hello and welcome to the Physician Financial Success Podcast. My name is Josh Mettle, and this is the podcast dedicated to advising physicians how to avoid financial landmines. This podcast is sponsored by the physician group at Fairway Independent Mortgage. Fairway recently expanded their physician home loan program to encompass other medical professionals, including CRNA, RN, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, veterinarians, dentists, and a host of other medical professionals. Basically, if you have an advanced degree in the medical field, you'll likely qualify for our medical professional program, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd invite you to reach out to us through our website, which is fairwayphysicianhomeloans.com, or you can call us at our direct line, 855-260-9932. We're here, and we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Today, we will be talking with Coach Chad Carson, author of Retire Early with Real Estate. Chad is an active real estate investor who has achieved financial independence at a young age and is now on a mission to share what he's learned with others through his books, websites, and online courses. Chad, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Josh. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited. I didn't tell you this earlier, but I had lunch with my my cousins, my two cousins this week. And they invited me to lunch, which was awesome and unusual. And I thought they wanted to borrow money or something.
What are they going to ask for?
Yeah, right. What's the hook? And they took me to a nice restaurant too, so I know there was something up. And they said, hey, Richard and Camilla. And they said, Richard is in the construction business and Camilla is in the marketing, and she's just got a great business mind to her. And they want to get together and collaborate and invest in real estate. So they were coming to me for advice. How do we get started? And I said, well, I can tell you all the stuff to do wrong, what not to do, right? But what I really want to do is introduce you to Coach Carson. So I immediately sent them your website. I told them they were crazy if they didn't buy your book. And I'm going to be sending this to them as a gift when we're done. So,
thank you so much.
The timing of this podcast is perfect, and we're going to dedicate this to Camilla and Richard.
Awesome. Let's do it. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome, man. I appreciate you being here. So let's give our listeners a little bit of background on you. How did you achieve financial independence at such a young age?
Well, it's kind of interesting for medical professionals listening to this. I sort of took a detour from what I thought would be my career, which would be medicine. I was a biology major in college. I played football, so that sort of paid for my college. And I thought I applied to medical schools. I had 5 applications in and was kind of going that way. And I pulled back and said, well, wait a minute. I was really busy with football during college. I just wanted to take a break. And I decided to become like an entrepreneur for a couple of years just to take a break. And I figured, I can learn how to invest in real estate. That'll help me later on when I have a real job. and I got into it, and I was, had nothing to lose basically. I kind of had my own car and I had $1,000 in the bank. So I was like, there's nothing to lose doing this. And I started it and I loved it. And I figured out how to make a little bit of money from it. I had to scrap by for a while. And one thing led to another, and I never went back to my medical school applications, and I decided to continue being an entrepreneur. So that's 16 years ago when I did that. And my real estate business has evolved. I used to flip houses a lot more just to make money and to put food on the table, basically. I learned how to find good deals and fix them up. More what I do now is I have buy and hold rental properties. A business partner and I do small multi-unit properties that we rent out. I'm in a small college town called Clemson in the kind of the foothills of the mountains, Appalachian Mountains in South Carolina. And so that's what we do. And I live off the rental income. That's kind of my financial story. And it's grown to that point where I can actually live off of it. And so that's kind of what my story and what the book was about, was both the blueprint, but also sort of the inspiration for being able to do that at a younger age. You can do this in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, instead of having to wait until you're 60, 70, 80 to retire or do other things in your life that you want to do.
Yeah, great backstory. And the one thing that I took out of what you said was you decided you were going to be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting fork in the road, that people kind of get to that fork and then they back off, and they get to that fork and they back off. And at the end of the day, if you want to start investing in real estate, you have to decide that you're going to travel that path. And that doesn't mean you have to invest every penny that you have, but you actually have to make a decision. You have to get educated, and you have to take a risk. Yeah. And I see so many people spend thousands of dollars on researching and time and energy, and they never pull the trigger and actually decide to take action.
Right. Yeah, I think you make a really good point. And that's the distinction I'll make about real estate up front, is that, real estate is really a business. It's a unique investment because it actually becomes much more passive, and it becomes more like a true investment down the road. Like right now, when I was, for the last 2 years, I probably, on the management of my properties, because I have other people doing it, I probably spend an hour or two per week on this, like the day-to-day kind of management. So it's a very part-time investment. But when I first started, it was a very intense investment. So I think that's what people have to prepare for if you do like what I do, which is more kind of own the properties directly and do it that way. There's a lot of benefits to that, but also what you said is right on, is that it is a business venture. And so you got to be prepared if you have a full-time job, you can still do it, but it's a side hustle. You've got to know that there's going to be some hustle involved. Either you're going to have to do it yourself, or if you're super busy, you're going to have to bring other people on board who can be part of your business. Like, you've got to look at it that way.
And my path was very similar to yours. We started flipping homes. We were terrible at it. So quickly we got out of that business, and they turned into long-term rentals. Yeah. Man, I wish I had your book when I was starting out. And so, I gathered my wife and I gathered my mom, and we created a family business. And, there were the beginning parts of this business was me on a ladder 30 feet in the air, wow, painting a roof at midnight because we had an open house the next day, right?
Wow.
I mean, that was the beginning of the business model. And it's like any other business where there's a ramp up phase, and you kind of got to get out of the atmosphere and and all of the inertia. And then you break through and you're like, oh, I've got enough cash flow here to pay for people. I don't have to paint 30 feet up in the air at midnight. Yes. But it is a business. You have to push through it if you're going to get to any kind of sustained momentum.
Agree 100%. Yeah. And I haven't been on 30. I'm not even good enough as a painter to get 30 foot on a ladder, luckily, but I've been like the grunt person who like pulls out insulation from crawl spaces. But I quickly got out of the remodel business. Like, I am a bad contractor. Like, I'm a bad like handyman carpenter person. So like very quickly I said, if I do this deal, I've got to hire other people because I'm horrible at this. Like, I can't cut a straight line. I can't do any of this. In fact, I don't know that I want to do any of that. So if you're handy, great. If you're not handy, you can kind of be like me and just pay other people to do it.
Yeah, figure a way to find a who that'll do it for you.
Yes, that's right.
Hey, so part of your story that I thought was incredibly exciting was you took your family on a 17-month trip to Ecuador, and you funded that incredible journey for your family through the cash flow of your rental properties. That lights a fire in so many people. Like, wow, what an inspiration. So tell us just a little bit about that.
Right. So my wife and I we love studying, going abroad, learning new languages. My wife's a Spanish teacher, and both of us are just like as gringo as it gets. Like, we're not like, my wife isn't from Latin America or something, but we love the culture there and we love traveling. And so we decided, even before we had kids, we took some little sabbaticals and mini retirements, we call them, or we went and traveled abroad and backpacked in South America. But once we had kids, and once the real estate business started doing even better and having income, we just decided that, this is like the time to do it. Our kids are 3 and 5. We wanted them to become fluent in another language early on in their life. It's kind of an experiment with, let's see how good they can be at a language and see if they can speak more native, early on. And so we just, pushed pause on our life here. We rented our house out for 2 years. We moved abroad. I had to, a lot of the difficulty was just detaching myself from all these local nonprofits and boards I was on and things. And we just went there. We found an apartment. We enrolled our girls in local schools that speak only Spanish. Just threw them in the deep end. They had like 10 or 20 words when we got there, but it was amazing. They blossomed. They made friends. We had great people we met. And just the living in another country, to me, wherever you go, the big cool thing is that the change it makes in you, that you're living in another culture where you see things are done a little bit differently. And it's just subtle things that you can't really put a finger on from abroad. And you just get to be there and live that life. And, we ate guinea pig in Ecuador where we were, and sent pictures back to all our friends at home who sent a picture of their pet guinea pig and said, "No, this is our pet. You can't eat that." And so there's just cool things like that we had a lot of fun with, and learning the language. And I'm very lucky and fortunate to be able to do it. It was a lot of fun.
How old are your kids, Chad?
They're now 5 and 7. So we left when they were 3 and 5, and we're back in the U.S., got back a few months ago, and they're enrolled in a local elementary school and speaking all English again. So we're kind of reacclimatizing ourselves back to the U.S.
Yeah, it was going back to all that English weird for them as well.
It was a little weird. Yeah. The first day of school, I said, they're going to speak English my little 5-year-old was like, "Are they going to speak English the whole time in class?" I was like, yeah, they don't speak any Spanish in class now.
That's awesome. What a cool journey, man. Those kids will remember that forever. And I'm glad you got a chance to do that. Really cool.
For sure.
So let's get into the why behind why you invest in real estate. And I'm thinking more, mindset or kind of peace of mind here, but why would a physician or any highly paid individual or anybody choose to invest in real estate as opposed to an index fund or a mutual fund, or how about just hire a financial advisor and stroke a check for $10,000 a month and call it good?
Yeah, so I think all those are good too. Like I don't think real estate's like the end all be all and the only thing, although it's like my main thing. But I think people are attracted to real estate naturally for a couple of reasons. One of those is, like sort of the negative people paint of real estate is that it's more active and that you have to be more involved. Well, like the flip side of that coin is because it is more active up front, it is a little bit more of a business, you actually have more control over your outcomes. And so like if you have an index fund, which is awesome, you're diversified, you own the entire market, like you're just going ultimate diversification. Well, real estate's sort of the opposite. It's saying, you know what, I'm going to go concentrate on one little neighborhood that I have an intuitive feel. And that's the cool thing about real estate is that we sort of know what a good rental property is because we've lived in other homes. We understand what neighborhoods people are looking for. And so you can go, unlike stocks where you have to pick like, what's the best tech stock? Like who really knows what's the fundamentals of a tech stock? But you can go look at a piece of property and pretty quickly understand why it's good and what's good about the neighborhood and whether that's up and coming. The numbers are really simple. Like if you're a medical professional, you've done a lot more complicated math and science than the real estate math. So it's simple, it's understandable, which is something that Warren Buffett always encourages people to do. Like invest in something you understand and that you know. And that's really what real estate is. It's a controllable thing. You can get involved, you can affect your outcome. If you're trying to retire early, which is I'm a big or reach financial independence is more probably the right word, you can kind of control the timing of that a little bit better through real estate. And so for all of those reasons, that tangible quality of it is a real asset. I find people just attract naturally to that. Some people are going to say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I want to be completely passive. Whereas other people say, you know what, at least for part of my portfolio, I like to not depend 100% on passive things and the timing of the market. And I just want to have, some money in the real estate market as well. And so I think people will divide themselves based on hearing that kind of benefit of real estate.
Yeah. And I think what you said was right. You said, it's a more active and involved investment. You have more control over it. But what I was thinking when you said active and involved is, it's so important who you're going to be partnering with. Most of our high income physicians are not, at least initially, going to go full time into this thing by themselves. They're going to need a partner. They're going to need some support because, they got a surgery to handle. Yes. They got anesthesia to administer, and that's got to be number one. But if you're partnering with somebody that brings joy to your life and makes you brighter, then it can really be a cool deal. And for me, it sounds like you've got a wonderful business partner that I believe you've had for many years. For me, it was my mother and my wife. And so we get to sit down and have reasons to go have business trips to go talk about our real estate holdings and attend a real estate seminar in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Like, how cool is that, right? Yep. But we are learning and we are educating, and we're growing this business. We're growing this business as we're growing a relationship. So I think if you can combo on those two things, where you have a relationship that brings joy to your life and you have an investment that you have control over, boom, it can be a home run.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll piggyback off your point is that my parents are actually a really good example of a medical professional having a partnership with a real estate investor, because that's what they did. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your spouse. It could be another family member. It could be a good friend. I think it needs to be somebody you trust, wholeheartedly, right? I mean, that's one of the big mistakes. My mother's a dentist. My dad was a CPA actually, but got into real estate investing and rental properties. And they made a really good partnership because my mom was a high earning professional, made very good income, good credit, had the down payments. My dad, had some other businesses that he did, but eventually decided that the best thing for them long run would be for him to be sort of the long-term investor for the couple. And then my mom would be the active income earner. And so he would go out and buy properties, and she would keep on earning money, and they would buy the properties together. And eventually, like, their retirement plan a few years ago was that she cashed out of her practice. They sold some land they had. They paid off 100% of their properties at that point. And now they have basically their own rental pension, if you could call it, that's replaced a big chunk of their income. And so that combination of real estate, like entrepreneur plus medical professional is for a lot of reasons works very well. Whether it's your spouse, would be awesome if that your spouse was interested in it. If not, another family member, or maybe just somebody you've grown to know that you meet in a local real estate club. You need to trust that person first and foremost, and then they need to be competent. Like, you can't just, hey, I trust my cousin, he's great, but like, can he actually get this done and be competent enough? So there's a process to go through for sure for a busy professional like many of your listeners. But if you can find that person, if you can kind of get a plan, build a business plan together, and I think it can be very successful.
The other thing about your parents' situation is, they've got all this principal, right? Which is the equity they have in these properties that are now free and clear. Mm-hmm. They'll never touch that. Their entire life, they will live off of that rental income. They don't care if the values double or go in half. Mm-hmm. They just stroke a rent check. Maybe that rent check varies 5-10% if there's a pullback or something like that, which our rents actually went up in the down period.
Ours did too.
And the beauty about that is they get to grow something their entire lives, then live off it the rest of their lives, and then they get to pass that on in an inheritance to their kids, as compared to an index fund or a mutual fund, which I have some of those as well. But what scares me about that is I watched 2001, I watched 2008, and I watched people at retirement age, they panicked, they hit the sell button, and they never got back in, and there's no way out of that mess.
Yeah. Real estate, like, one of the objections people give me is like, well, it's illiquid. You can't sell it. And I say, well, good. You can't sell it. In a downturn, you're not going to do something stupid and sell it. And so you're exactly right. I mean, my parents and other people who retire off real estate have these assets. They're real. They're there. And if they needed money, they could refinance them. They could borrow from those. They could sell one at a time, if they needed to raise some capital. I mean, so they're there. They're real assets, but they're not so easy to sell that you do something irrational. And every study that I've ever read about why investors don't succeed in stocks and everything else is their own psychology. Like, if you just invest in the market and stick to it, I mean, you're going to be fine whether you do index funds or real estate. But real estate is sort of built for our built-in biases and our blind spots, and that you can't sell it easily. It's very predictable. It's very steady. It's like the tortoise, not the hare. And then eventually it's really strong when you can not have to eat your principal. Like, I think one of the other issues about stocks is that you have to sell often because the dividends aren't high enough. You're going to need to sell some of your stocks to live off of in retirement. And real estate's kind of the opposite. Like, you have a high enough income return typically that you just live off the income. And every once in a while you might sell a property, but you don't have to eat into principal, which psychologically is really important. I think for people, even if the math works, selling off property or your stocks, you're like, oh man, I'm eating into my principal during retirement. That scares me. Whereas if you have a big portfolio of rental properties, they're just there, and you pass them on to your heirs at a stepped up basis, which is really important, or to a nonprofit or whoever you're going to donate it to. And that means that you basically have been able to depreciate these properties and benefit from them tax wise, which is a whole nother conversation, but then your heirs actually get they inherit those properties at the full value at the time that you pass away, which means they don't have to sell them and pay a huge capital gains tax and depreciation recapture and all these kind of gotchas that you might find for the tax code. Your heirs get a really good deal, actually.
Yeah. Just to break that down for people that might not be familiar with it, what Coach is saying is that when his parents and my parents eventually pass away, we will inherit their real estate holdings with a stepped up basis, which means that I'm not going to pay taxes if I ever sell those properties, which I hope not to. My plan is to pass those on to Xander and Aria and my kids. But I will receive those properties at a tax basis based on whatever the value of the properties were when my mother passes away, as opposed to what she paid for the properties 20 years earlier. So if I did sell those properties, your tax basis is dramatically less, which is an incredible, that's like being able to sell a business down the road with no tax ramifications for the gain. It's an incredible loophole of all loopholes.
Exactly. Yes, it's enormous. So I wrote an article one time about tax benefits of real estate, and my final one was die. And I said, it's not a good strategy for life, but it's actually a good strategy for real estate investment.
No doubt. It could save you millions. Or at least your heirs. Hey, one more thing you mentioned there. I've been doing a lot of research into a guy by the name of Dr. Joe DeSpina, and he talks a lot about our thought processes and our mental state and how that there's a connection there between human longevity. And I've always just had this hunch intuitively in my brain. I said, okay, I'm going to build up this money in this stock account. And then when I retire, I'm going to start pulling off that money. The first thing that goes through my brain is, damn, I hope I die before my money runs out.
Yes.
Right? So as soon as you put yourself in that relationship where literally you'd rather die, I would rather die than run out of money in late retirement. You've literally picked a date or at this juncture, I want to be dead. Yeah. And maybe that's just me and the way that I kind of look at that relationship. But if you look at it conversely to real estate, you're never pulling down the principal. If you have enough cash flow to live on, it's not that type of sand through the hourglass type relationship.
Yeah, no, I think the psychology is huge, and both when you're building wealth and also when you withdraw from it. And the withdrawal part, I'm just getting into that myself, where I'm living off income. But the more I study other people who've lived off income for years, that point has really come home to me too. That you can't discount the fact that you've been working all these years to build wealth. You've been, as a medical professional, you've been working all these years and making really good salary, and all of a sudden you're going to go and live off your income, and you're going to be like just eating away at it. And this almost a reverse psychology where you've been producing a lot of income. Now all you're doing is eating at it. And so you gotta, I think, building a hedge for that inevitable kind of like, ooh, we're all going to kind of panic at that a little bit and maybe not all in on real estate. I know a lot of people who have like a kind of a base of real estate, and they say, all right, I need $100,000 a year in retirement. Let's just make sure I have like 30,000 or 50,000 bucks coming in from rental properties. And then I've got Social Security. You kind of stack those things up.
Yeah.
So like if stocks are covering like half of your retirement nut, all right, good. I can live off, like I can do that. But like, I know worst case scenario, I've got this real estate pension coming in that's going to take care of me.
Yeah. Great point. I don't know if you've ever done this, but the opposite of watching your stocks go down as you eat off the principal in retirement is forecasting your rental income forward by, the rule of 72. So you can figure out how many years it's going to take for your rents to double.
Right.
But dude, have you thought about how much money you're going to be making when you're 120 years old? It's like ridiculous, right?
Wow.
You're like, I'm definitely going to live to be 120 because at that age, if I do my math right, I'm going to be in the French Riviera.
I like the way you think, Josh. I got to start doing some of these exercises. I've been thinking way too short term. Like you've got me thinking bigger picture here.
Yeah, 80 years down the road, this is going to be a sweet deal for you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. This was so much fun. Let's go a little bit into the financial benefits of investing in real estate, because if you've never bought a property, if you don't know real estate, you don't own them, you really don't understand the different ways that real estate can add to your income or reduce your taxes. And let's talk about how rental properties can impact the wealth of our physician listeners.
Sure. I think I can make it pretty simple here. I think there's three main levers. You could look at them as the way real estate, particularly rental real estate, can make you money. Number one is the income it produces, the rental income. Number two is the amortization of your debt. So like one of the cool things I love in my portfolio is that every year, as long as I break even, like my tenants are basically paying my properties off for me. Like they are paying my mortgage, which is the exact opposite. You know, most people are like panicking because they have to pay their mortgage every month and they're having to pay the bills. Like, no, my tenants are paying off my properties. They're going to work and working hard and paying my properties. So that's number two. And then number three is appreciation. And appreciation can come in a couple different forms. You can have some passive appreciation, which real estate over the big picture in good markets tends to keep up with the inflation rate. That's what you've seen over the last about 80 to 100 years, is that if inflation's 2 to 3%, that's about what you're going to see in most real estate markets. So those three combined are really interesting. The income in particular, I think we've talked about income and living off your income, but all three of those are really good as growth mechanisms too, because they're tax optimized. They're sort of like a retirement account before there were retirement accounts. Because, for example, a lot of your listeners will be high income earners, and you know how high your tax rate is on your salary. Well, when you make rental income, let's say you make $40,000 in rental income this year, if you have enough depreciation, which maybe I need to explain what that is, it's basically a tax loss. It's a paper loss that the IRS requires you to show on your properties. It basically, you take the whole purchase price of your building, and you've got to take a piece of that every year as a loss. Even though you've already spent the money up front, you start taking it as a loss over a 27.5-year period or so. And so what that means for you, though, as a rental property investor, if theoretically you had $40,000 in paper depreciation loss, and you also had $40,000 in rental income, you're basically protecting that $40,000 in rental income from paying taxes on it. And so for you as a medical professional, if you're in a 40% tax bracket, take 40%, almost 50% of your $40,000. I mean, that's significant money. You're talking about $15,000, $17,000 per year you're saving. And so how much faster can you grow your portfolio when you're saving that much in taxes off your rental income? That's a really big deal. And I don't know if you want to make any comments on that too, Josh, but I think that's one of the main mechanisms that I see for high income earners. That's one of the reasons they want to produce rental income, because it can kind of shelter itself and produce a kind of a stream of income that is more tax optimized. Yeah,
you nailed it. Two things I would just say. Most people haven't looked at an amortization chart. And of the three you mentioned, income from rental income, amortization, and appreciation, the amortization, I think, might be the least understood. But basically what happens with a mortgage, most of us intuitively understand that in the first 5 or 10 years, you're mostly paying interest and very little principal. But once you hit the 10-year mark in your properties, and at least my experience has been, the cash flow is wonderful, because the appreciation of what you can now charge in rent is pretty incredible.
Yep.
That also seems to be a point in our holdings where we start to do some cool upgrades, and we get a really big bump in rent at that point. Whoa, rent just went up $300 a month because we did this little bit of capital improvements. And at about the 10-year mark, if you look at an amortization chart, now you are cranking on that principal. I mean, every month you're $400, $500, $600, $800 a month if you've got a bigger property that you're just crushing in terms of paying down that balance. And so when you look at a real estate investment, it's a lot like compound interest, in that in the first 10 years, it's man, am I even making any progress? But in year 10 to 20 and 20 to 30, it is it's exponential.
Right.
Because those levers that you mentioned, the rent increases, which is part of the appreciation. As the properties go up, you're going to get more for rents. And the amortization plays in, and you start really chunking down the principal. It is just an incredibly lucrative business once you get in a little bit.
Yeah, I love how you point that out. Yeah, I've kind of experienced the same thing. I've been in the 16 years, and my first 6 years, I mean, rental properties, I'm like, why am I doing a rental property? I'm not making any money. Like I was having to flip houses just to survive. But
Mm-hmm.
now, 16 years later, I've just as an example for people to get some real numbers, I had a $400 per month like apartment, rental. Like so, I actually lived in one unit and rented out the other 3 units. It was a house hack, is what we call those. But I 400 per month in 2005 is now like $600 per month in my town, 10 years, 15 years later. So like in those numbers, if you start off with $1,000 rental, that might be, and so it just happens and you benefit from it, just like compound interest. If you buy in the right locations, that's the other thing I'll say. Like one of the fundamentals of real estate, in addition to the numbers, is buying locations that have qualities that tend to breed appreciation. You want to be in an area where population's increasing. You want the demographics for jobs to be good. And most big cities are like in metro areas are fit that bill. But I think it pays to spend a little bit of time up front deciding like where you're going to sort of plant your real estate farm. You want to make sure there's fertile soil there. And so that's an important step. But if you do that correctly, if you kind of pay your dues up front, then the long term, like you said, it's going to get better and better, like good wine. I mean, it's just going to keep getting better over time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the biggest mistake someone can make is to buy a long-term property where the economic vitality of the area is going down.
Yes.
You want to look at an area and go, wow, there's a lot of young people here and they're all coming for the university. And Morgan Stanley just opened a building next door because they can hire all the young people, right? That's the kind of setup you want to see, because if there's economic vitality coming to an area, your real estate will do just fine. Just hang tight.
Yeah, that's right.
Cost segregation studies. Have you looked into those recently?
I've never done one myself, but I've studied them, and I wrote about them in the book a little bit, actually. I think it's an interesting strategy for high-income professionals, particular, who might be able to buy a big multi-unit property or a big commercial building and benefit from a whole, basically it's a way to like just tsunami your depreciation, or build a big avalanche of depreciation to be able to offset some gains down the road. So it's a very advanced, very advanced, but it's an advanced tax strategy where you have to hire some people. My understanding of it is,
yes.
But if you get somebody to help you execute it correctly, it can be just as good as like a 1031 exchange, tax-free exchange, which is another kind of popular strategy. And so I'm very interested in them, and have not executed them myself, but I would be curious how other people have used them.
So we just did our first set of cost segregation studies on a few of our properties. I'll give you some numbers from one that we're in the middle of right now, because this is immediately applicable to our medical professionals. If you own an office building, or if you're kicking around the idea of buying your own office building and then retrofitting it so it works for you,
right?
The tax benefits are unbelievable. So we bought a office warehouse building downtown Salt Lake City. Acquisition cost of the building was $1 million. It's a $2.5 million construction loan that we went out and got to do the renovations. So of that $2.5 million that's all funded by the construction loan, we were able to write off about almost 90% of that. So in the year that the building goes into service, which it hasn't gone into service yet, the partners that own that building will get about a $2 million tax deduction.
Wow.
And then that's distributed out based on your ownership percentages. But the way I'm looking at it is like, man, you almost don't have, you can almost not pay taxes anymore if you're able to buy buildings fast enough. Now, the downside to that, cost segregation studies are not cheap; they are expensive, and you've pulled forward all your depreciation. So now I'm not going to have any of those great tax advantages that you mentioned going forward, because I've pulled them all forward.
Right. And there might be one, I think it's awesome. I think that's a really interesting angle. The other thing I would throw out there, just maybe like, this is why you work with a CPA or somebody who knows a lot about this, is that everybody can benefit from depreciation differently depending on what your status as a real estate professional is. So like my father, for example, he had a real estate professional status because he worked a certain number of hours per year. And so he and my mother were able to use 100% of the depreciation on those properties to offset her medical income, which was amazing. I mean, they were able to reduce their taxable income to a very low number. Other people, perhaps, though, like, for example, if you're making $500,000 a year as a doctor, and you may or may not be able to use all of that depreciation, because it's a passive loss, my understanding is. So, but
You're right.
There still could be some benefits, because let's say you sell that building 5 years from now at a $500,000 gain, which would probably be my strategy. If I do a cost segregation strategy like that, I would want to sell it and make a big gain. And then instead of me paying capital gains and depreciation recapture, I would be able to use all that loss the time I sold it to offset each other. So I think it's still a really incredible strategy, but it takes some timing, and it takes some knowledge from you and your CPA of like what your situation is. And that's why I think it's a little bit more advanced, but it's still amazing.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'm glad you brought that up, Coach. My wife qualifies as our real estate professional in the relationship because she does all the accounting for all of our properties. If it was just me, I wouldn't be able to have those same advantages. It's a great point. Hey, so let's transition to, I think, what is a really common kind of thought process for physicians, which is how do you manage rental properties from a distance? You know, many of our listeners may not be in the same state for more than 3 to 5 years. Maybe they do residency, fellowship, then they've got their first contract. They decide they don't like that state. They move on. So how do you effectively manage real estate from a distance? What options are out there?
Right. So if you have a small number of rental properties, like you had a house that you used to live in and you rented it out, and it's just a good residential house or something, I think it's not too hard to do it self-management. But I'll qualify that to say, like, I have other managers managing my property. So like, I think both are options. There's a lot of cool technologies out there. Like, I'm a fan of cozy.co is a free property management software online where you can collect rent for free. You can get applications for free. I had a good friend in Ecuador that I lived with. He's an American, but he has rental properties in Seattle, and he has nobody managing them there. He just has his tenants pay their rent through Cozy. It goes into his bank account. When there's maintenance issues, he has a list of people he calls here and there. But so he managed 2 or 3 rental properties from Ecuador, just like I managed, 90 units from Ecuador. But because I had more units and had a more intensive kind of student rentals, I have people on the ground who I hired to help me. So either way, like if you have a lower management property like a house, I think you might be able to figure out how to do it yourself. I think that's probably my recommendation up front. But if you're completely opposed to that, it's okay to also hire managers. Like I pay 10% of my rent every month to my property management company. And I found a good one. There's some bad ones too, but it's like the team we talked about earlier. If you hire a good team around you, they will make your life wonderful. Like, you won't take those calls in the middle of the night that everybody's worried about with tenant and toilets and that kind of stuff. Like, you can have a much more passive business if you pay people to do things who are good professionals, just like you. I wouldn't come and do surgery for you. You wouldn't come in maybe and collect rent for somebody or screen a tenant. Like, you can hire somebody to do that if that's really what, not your thing. Yeah.
So is that cozy.com?
Cozy.co.
.co.
Yeah, so COZY.co. And they have a really, my friend who writes their blog is, landlordology.com. That's a really good information on screening tenants and doing all that. So, and I actually featured him in the book too. So I think that's a good resource for everybody that doesn't cost any money. They make their money whenever they screen tenants. So like, you can charge your tenant $30-$40 for a tenant screening, which is about normal. And then Cozy makes their money whenever they do that, but they don't charge you anything else, which I think is incredible. They have a really good service.
What an incredible business model. And the other thing you said was, he has a team, and they're not a full-time team. They're just people he's used in the past. He's got an air conditioning guy. He's got a plumber. He's got somebody that helps him do some general turnover. Yep. And if you're going to turn your owner-occupied property into an investment property and move on, you want to start building that team and testing them while you're still in the home. And then when you move out, you say, okay, great. I already got my 5 or 6 people I know I got to contact. They come out and they, do the summarization and winterization, and it just rolls.
Yes. Yeah. And technology just changed everything. Like, I mean, even 10 years ago when I went on some sabbaticals to South America, I was having to use Skype on a little laptop. Like, now I have my cell phone wherever I am. And so long distance management is much easier with technologies like Cozy, with your cell phone, call somebody up. I mean, you really can do things from a distance if you build some good teams on the ground.
Cool. That was really valuable. Hey man, I feel like we could go for 2 hours, but this is going to be our last question, and I really appreciate you sharing so generously with me.
Sure.
But I want to talk a little bit about what the ideal steps are. If I was a younger physician in training on a limited income with limited capital, or if I was an attending physician with capital to invest, how would you recommend I get started down the path to building passive investments?
I'm glad you asked this question because you're kind of letting me get on my soapbox a little bit. So if I could talk to every like person getting out of college or getting out of medical school, like if I could just give them like one thing in real estate, they don't have to buy rental properties like I've done. They don't have to do all this. If they could just do this one thing when they get out, I think I would change the amount of wealth that people have in the country. And it's basically doing this. Like if you turn your home for the first 5 years of your life, like the first 5 years when you actually start making some money, whether it's as a resident or, you know, a new physician, like if you will, instead of buying the dream home, instead of buying like the big house that you deserve because you've worked hard, I know you've worked hard, but if you will just go out and buy either one or two things. One, like if you could live in a duplex and live in one side of the duplex and rent out the other side of the duplex, or live in a house that has a basement apartment that you could rent out on Airbnb or to a long-term tenant, and try to produce some income from your home during those first 3 to 5 years. We, in the real estate nerd world, we call that house hacking, where you're basically hacking, like instead of you going out and paying $1,000 out on your mortgage, you're now like receiving rent. You might even be able to live for free or 50% of your cost. And can you just imagine, like if you had no housing cost, or if you had half your housing cost, how much money you could start saving in those early years and start compounding?
Definitely.
So it's just a big deal. But there's also benefits of learning the business. So you're living there and you just got out of your residency. You just got out of med school or something. You know, you're used to being kind of living in an apartment or wherever you're. So just delay that like big house thing for a little while. You'll get it. You'll be able to live there. But the benefits of owning that property, you can then move out of that property. You got a mortgage, you got an owner occupied mortgage, which is the best you can get. You can then move out and rent the property out. And if you do that 1 or 2 times, you now have 2 rental properties that you can keep for the rest of your life. You can pay them off, you can manage them or hire somebody to manage them. And you've now like built your real estate portfolio in a really solid way. And then you can move on with your life and do everything else you want to do. And just because you started that way, either with a duplex or just a modest house that you could then rent out after you moved out, like either one of those to me would be the smartest decision you can make with your housing. And it would pay huge dividends down the road.
So I know I said it was the last question, but I got one more question. I got to follow up. I was actually introduced to you by my friend and one of my financial mentors, Dr. Jim Dolly, the White Coat Investor.
Oh, great.
And, one of his, as I read his book, one of his foundational wealth success rules is for physicians to live like a resident the 3 to 5 years after residency. And what happens, like you said, is there's all that kind of pent up demand for joy, like let's spend some of this money, let's get out there and have, because we've been scraping for so long. But if you can just let that subside for a little while, he says that is really the linchpin for long-term financial success. So tell us why is it that you and Jim have identified that the key years are from end of schooling for the next, let's call it 3 to 5 years. Why are those years more impactful than maybe any other years of your life?
I mean, I think part of it's pure finance, part of it's psychological. We keep talking psychology today, which I think is important. But the pure financial part is just compounding. Mm-hmm. Like all of you are smart. Go look at what's called a future value calculator or a time value calculator and just punch in $20,000 today at 7% return for the next 20, 30 years. And you're just gonna be shocked at how big that gets if you just let it compound. And so that's the financial part. Number one, you just got to start saving and making smart investments early as possible. So those first 3 to 5 years are critical for that. But I also think the psychology is that you're sort of just showing yourself that you can be happy wherever you are. And so like now, to me, like my wife and I, when we first got married, we lived in the fourplex. It was the happiest years. We're happy now too, but like those were amazing years. We met some wonderful like grad students who lived next to us who were from China, and we had meals together and we got to know them better. And so I just think there's this treadmill that we all kind of get on, and we're kind of put on in society to think like we're going to be happy when we get to this next level, as opposed to, and we think like sacrifice is going to make you not happy, when in reality, like there's been ancient wisdom showing, you look at some of these old philosophers and Aristotle and all sorts of every religion, like just like, look at all that stuff and let's just simplify things a little bit. And so I think when you do that early on in your life, you then start having a little bit more discretion about, well, all right, what's that next purchase? I'm not saying like a luxury car is a bad purchase. I'm just saying, like you will have a better gauge on yourself on like what you really want, what you don't, and don't be swept away by other people making decisions for you.
That was awesome. That was really awesome, man. I got nothing to add to that. That's about as good as it gets. I think that is such good wisdom. Man, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I know people are going to want to know where to get your book, where to get your website. I also subscribe to your weekly emails, which is not spam. You send out something valuable every single week. At least it feels like every week.
Thank you.
And
every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday. And it is actual valuable, not just trying to get you to buy something. It's like, just if you read this and don't pay Chad a dime, you are going to be a better investor. So how do people find you?
So I live at coachcarson.com online. So keep it simple there. And I do have a newsletter, and I have kind of a starter kit, a real estate investor toolkit. Like if you just want to get some of the tools I use, like my deal analysis form and my closing checklist. So I give away some just kind of my free kind of essential tools for investors when you sign up for the newsletter. And then my book, if this stuff is interesting to you, if you want sort of a big picture roadmap on how to use real estate to retire early, that's what the book's all about. And I also have a lot of profiles of other people who've done it. And so that's it. You can look on Amazon. It's there. I'm getting the Audible book. It's coming out soon. A Southern accent and all. I recorded it myself. So you'll get to listen to me for 8 hours. And then the book is at Bigger Pockets as my publisher, which is another really good resource. I write on Bigger Pockets as well. And they are an awesome organization. So you can buy it there or you can buy it on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay. Action items for every listener. Go buy the book. And at least sign up for his weekly emails that he gets on his website. If you have time for nothing else, just do that because it is incredible information. Coach, thanks so much for sharing with us, man. It was an absolute pleasure.
This is fun, Josh. Thanks a lot for having me.